This is Chip Maxwell, and you're listening to the Retire Smart podcast with David Brooks. From the White House press office to Capitol Hill, Becky Swansburg has seen firsthand how policy decisions shape Americans' financial futures. Becky joins in the conversation with David and breaks down the newest tax changes, the realities of legislative risk, and how to strategically plan for rising taxes over the next 20 to 40 years.
Joining me now via Zoom in the studio, if you will, Becky Swansburg. Becky and I have been friends for many years. Becky spent a long part of her career in the cesspool we call D.C.
That's right.
She is actually the one that coined the phrase, which we use quite often, legislative risk. And I've seen her do keynote after keynote many years. In fact, we've been on the same stages many times talking, and we each have software that we license to advisors to help them understand how to better put their clients in a better position with the tax code. You've written several books. In fact, we may be working on one together where Becky asked me to write the foreword of a book, so that was pretty cool. And that's just it. It's industry professionals get to collaborate with other ones, and all we want to do is convey great message to the client. So welcome to the show. Thanks for jumping on.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So we were just talking before we went on air here is that you're booking your flight. So we're really excited. You are going to be our featured keynote this year in our September speaker series, which we have now put on for many years. We've had former comptroller of the United States, David Walker. We've had leading economists like Strider Elos. We put on some pretty good guests, and you are no slouch when it comes to talking to folks about what is going to potentially happen in Washington in very real terms. What would that mean? What could that potentially change for retirement? So talk a little bit about what your messaging is, because not only are we excited to have you, but friends of mine have had you come give keynotes in their marketplaces all over the country.
Well, thanks. This is an exciting time to be kind of talking about what's going on in Washington because, of course, 4th of July, while we were all enjoying hot dogs and maybe the pool, Congress was passing and the president was signing into law the One Big Beautiful Bill. And I know that probably our listeners have heard a lot about this legislation. It has lots of tax changes, particularly for U.S. savers and U.S. savers age 65 plus. So it's a very important time to be looking at what's happening in the tax world because everything's changed a little bit. And I like to say what we're really working to do now is we are in this lower tax bracket rate environment thanks to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and then this One Big Beautiful Bill. How do we leverage what is happening today in this lower environment to better prepare for what's coming tomorrow, which every indicator shows that taxes are likely to rise? And I think that's the important thing to remember is that retirement is not about the next 4 years or the next administration. It's about the next 20, 30, or 40 years into the future. So it's really important to look at long-term trends and figure out how to leverage today's tax environment to address them.
Well, I think you bring up a great point. Is we are blessed that we are in a relatively low tax environment, historically speaking. The only time it was really lower was literally the first year and a half. Yeah. We put income taxes in place when we had the top bracket at just 7%. And that's going back 112 years. So, but for the last 40, when we've had major legislative changes, and I always talk about how the political aisle, which you, and I'd love you to talk in a minute about your experience working in D.C., but, you had Tip O'Neill and Reagan come across the aisle, shake hands, and kind of, do some things that got the economy going in a time that was needed. We lowered the marginal tax rates, which was great to start an economic boom. But in return for that, it wasn't a free lunch, right? That's when we started taxing Social Security, right? So, and then we had Clinton, who I think from the Democratic side of the aisle was probably one of the best economic presidents, if you just look at data.
Agreed.
And he went across the aisle with Newt Gingrich, a hardcore conservative. And they had the Contract for America, but they made compromises. And they actually, following what I call the Laffer curve to point of diminishing returns, they actually raised taxes minusculely. It was a small move, but we proved you could do that with economic growth. So people get too politicized in this stuff, I believe. I always tell clients, look, I'm a registered independent. I certainly lean conservatively, fiscally to the right. I'm open about that. But I always tell people I don't care about the party or the person. It's the policy. And that's why I think you are so valuable, because that's what you do. You dig into the policy, the likelihood that policy may change based on just looking at real historical data. So tell our audience a little about your history working in D.C., kind of how you got in, and how did you pivot that into our financial services career?
Yeah, well, I started out under the Bush administration, George W. Bush's first administration, in the White House press office. And then I hopped over to Capitol Hill. And when I was working on Capitol Hill for the Speaker of the House and a couple different members of Congress, I really thought kind of my career I'd make in policy. I was very interested in federal legislation. But more and more, it dawned on me how much these federal policies that we were debating and passing in the halls of Congress were impacting Americans in ways that they didn't always realize. And I saw it with my parents. They were saving for retirement, and almost their entire savings approach was what I like to call through a personal lens. How much income were they going to need in retirement? What kind of tax bracket would that put them in? How long would they be filing joint? And maybe would one of them become widowed and be filing as a single filer? But it was all about them. And when I worked in Washington, I realized all these decisions that we make about our personal finances, they exist in this ecosystem that is prescribed to us from the nation's capital. And that the decisions being made in Congress and in the White House, they can directly impact the success or failure of our approaches if we're not careful, if we hadn't aligned what we're doing financially with what's coming out of Washington, both short term and long term. So that's my real passion. What I'm excited to kind of share with our audience when I'm joining you in Omaha is really looking at what are the long-term trends and what can we do today to be prepared.
That's fantastic. Look, we were running out of time for this segment, Becky. We're really excited to have you out here. So just give my audience, let know the September Speaker Series is going to be Monday, September 15th at 6:30 p.m. at the Relevance Center out in Elkhorn. That's just off of Maple, just west of 204. But you must register. The public, you are welcome to come to this event. And most of our events, we don't always invite the public. So you are invited to this, but you must register. There will be limited capacity there. And I'm sure we're going to kind of sell out, if you will, this event. Becky does such a wonderful job. Becky, thank you so much for taking time to join us in studio this week. We'll look forward to having you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Retire Smart podcast with David Brooks. If you want to learn how to generate lifetime income, reduce your tax bill, and maintain your lifestyle in retirement, visit retiresmartpodcast.com. And make sure to subscribe to keep up with new episodes every week. Becky Swansburg and Stonewood Financial are not clients and were not compensated for her appearance on this show or any apparent endorsement that it might imply. However, Becky Swansburg will receive a $10,000 fee for appearing at a speaking engagement sponsored by Retire Smart.